The first thing we need to do to set up the MPG-70 is to connect the necessary cables. If you're planning on using the PG-800 port on the MPG-70 to control the JX, then you will only need to connect the PG-800 port. That's located right here. Be aware that if you use the PG-800 port instead of MIDI, some functions such as upper and lower voice select won't work. This is because the PG-800 language doesn't have commands for these functions. If you want to get the most out of the programmer, we recommend using MIDI sysx to communicate with the synth. Today I'm using MIDI sysx to communicate with the synth. We've got our keyboard controller's MIDI out port connected to the MIDI in port on the MPG-70. The MPG-70's MIDI out port is then connected to the synth's MIDI in port. This allows the note and controller messages from the keyboard controller or your DAW to be passed through the MPG-70 back to the synth. Now we've got to configure the MIDI menu on the MPG-70. To go to the MIDI menu on the MPG-70, press the MIDI button once. Now we're looking at the current configuration for the MPG-70 MIDI. The first thing we need to choose is the model and the protocol that we want to use. It's important to note that MPG-70 speaks 11 different languages, each one corresponding to a different model or firmware version of the Super JX or JXAP. Today we'll be using an MKS-70 that has the Beethoven PWM mod, and it's running version 4.x of the firmware. Since I said I want to use sysx, I'm going to choose Beethoven sysx as the protocol here. You can see all these different protocols. So I've just chosen Beethoven Super JX Pulse Width Modulation sysx. Next, I need to choose the channel that the MPG-70 will be receiving incoming notes on. Since my controller here is sending notes on channel 1, I'm going to set the MPG-70 input channel to 1/2. The /2 bit is because if we create a split on the MKS-70, then the lower half of the split will respond to channel 1, and the upper half of the split will respond to channel 2. Next, I need to select the out channel on the MPG-70. This should correspond to the MIDI in channel on the synth. My MKS-70 is receiving on MIDI channel 3, so let's select 3/4 here. This means that when I play notes from this keyboard on channel 1, the MPG-70 will read those notes and send them out to the synth on channel 3. It also means when I do something like move this filter cutoff slider, that message will be sent to the synth as sysx on channel 3. We now need to make sure that the MIDI menu of the JX is configured correctly.